see a couple people trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started. So this is one of our events for the Alumni 101 series. This particular event is focused on determining whether you should go to grad school, and we have some really great panelists joining us today to talk about different things to consider if you're considering going to grad school, and then tell you a little bit more about what their experience was like. So with that, I want to start the event by giving a little bit of an introduction, first of myself, and then of what we do at the Career Center and how we can help you on your journey to deciding on whether or not to go to graduate school. And then we'll jump right into some questions for the panelists and give you guys the opportunity to ask your own questions towards the end. Okay, so as I said, this is a Should You Go to Grad School event. My name's Alicia. I am one of the pre-grad advisors at the UCSD Career Center. I'm happy to meet with students one-on-one to discuss any questions that we don't go over today. I'm also a PhD student myself here at UCSD and can share some of my experiences. So with that, let's jump right in. Many of you submitted questions ahead of time for this event, and so I thought that I would kind of try to hit a bunch of them with some really brief intro of, how to know if grad school is the right choice for you. So I think the answer to that question really revolves around what is your career endpoint, right? Is grad school required for the career that you want to get? And so one of the best ways to start going about determining that is, first of all, you need to choose, what career are you looking at? And it can be really difficult to get an idea of what's even possible with the major that you're doing. So one of the best things that you can do is to use some free assessments that are available to start guide you in the directions of certain professions. So there are 4 that we commonly use. The first are really exploratory. There's one I really love called What Can I Do with This Major? It's a giant list of majors, and you can click on it and it gives you all sorts of jobs that are either very obviously related and some that you might not have thought of. The next is the My Next Move O-Net Interest Profiler. That one helps more go from the standpoint of what are your interests? What do you want to do? What do you like doing professionally? And guides you towards a profession that way. And I think using both together helps you really determine, what am I studying? What can that lead to? And what do I like? What can that lead to? And then the last 2 are a little bit more specific resources. Imagine Ph.D. is a career exploration tool for the humanities and social sciences, especially for students who are interested in a PhD. And then Science Careers has an assessment called My IDP, and that's more focused for STEM. It's particularly geared towards PhD students, but it's a really good exploration tool to kind of get a better idea of what is available out there. And then lastly, once you've kind of started to identify a professional path or a career you might be interested in, the best thing that you can do to get a better idea of whether that path is right for you and what it takes to get into those careers is to do some informational interviews. So we don't have time to go deeply into how to do that, but the 2 best ways are to use LinkedIn. You can go to the UC San Diego page in the alumni section and search for any profession to find alumni who are in that profession. And then you can do the exact same thing with Triton's Connect. It's UCSD's internal version of LinkedIn. And we have lots of alumni that have created profiles and who are very willing to help students have a conversation about what their path was like. So this is kind of the first step of figuring out whether grad school is the right choice for you. Once you've done that, glitch in the system for a second.
All right, do I need to reshare it? I popped up something wrong on my screen. Is it still sharing the slide?
It's still sharing, yeah.
Okay,
I just need to go to the next slide. Perfect. So the next is how to choose a graduate program. So you've decided that you wanted to go to graduate school, that it's required for the career path that you want to follow, but you just really have no idea on what things you should consider when you're choosing a graduate program. So the first thing that you should look at is the curriculum of your graduate program. Is the curriculum going to give you the skills and the knowledge that you need to be a competitive applicant to the profession that you want? And that's especially important for master's programs and law schools, because those tend to be a little bit more curriculum heavy. For PhDs, although that's important, that may be a little bit less important to consider, but still something to keep in your mind. The next thing that we want to consider is the faculty that are part of this program. Now, this is especially important for PhD programs because you're going to be working really closely with faculty during a very extended period of time. So you want to make sure that the faculty that are in these programs, and that it's actually true for masters as well, and law schools, absolutely. But you want to make sure that the faculty, you have common interests, that you're interested in working with these people, whether it's professionally or you want to have them as a mentor. If you're looking at STEM PhDs, you want to make sure that they have labs that are doing research that you're interested in. For other PhDs, that they have interests and research interests that match yours. So the next thing following that is to think about the opportunities. And that varies widely based on the graduate program, right? But we're talking about the labs that are available for you to do your work in as a master's student or a PhD if you're in STEM. The internships that are available. So if you're more of in a professional program, a master in social work, something like that, you want to make sure that the internships or the activities that you do in that program are going to be linked to what you're interested in. So if you want to be a social worker and you really want to work with the veteran population, you want to make sure that that program has a connection with the VA. That's just an example. So you want to really look at what are the opportunities available to me if I go to this program. And then the next thing is to think about the extracurriculars. And so that's things that are a little bit outside of your either work or class. And that can include things like if you're really interested in outreach and you want to work with youth, then maybe they have a program that you could do that with, and that's something that draws you to that program. Or in law school, if you are very interested in working in a certain type of field or with a certain population, maybe they have a clinic that you can work at. Same thing with Masters in Public Health. Maybe they have a specific program that you might be a part of. So you want to make sure that outside of the strict work and school that you're doing, that there's going to be other things that draw you to the program. And then lastly, the thing we want to consider is take a look at their alumni. Are they going into the careers that you want to be going into? Because at the end of the day, the reason you're doing this graduate program is to get into the career that you want, right? So you want to make sure that it's going to prepare you and that they have a history of sending people into the right place. And then really quickly, the last part that I wanted to address was the application process, because we got a lot of questions. And it's really tough to address that in a holistic view because every program has such different application requirements. But really briefly, the first thing that you want to think of is kind of before you apply. So before you apply, there are a bunch of things that you can start doing. You know, it's never too early. Engaging in research, internships, volunteer work, anything that will get you experience in this field is going to be really essential for your application and your success in the program later. Fostering relationships with your professors and your mentors and supervisors who are going to be your letter writers is also, I think students often undervalue that aspect. Maintaining a strong GPA, of course, and then preparing for any standardized tests. After that, I'll very briefly talk about the components of an application. However, keep in mind that that varies widely. So there's usually some kind of personal statement where you talk about your motivation for the program and your experience, CV, transcript, letters of recommendation, typically around 3, and then your standardized test scores. And then lastly, you know, it gets to the point where you have interviews or you receive acceptances and you need to make a school selection. So law schools and most STEM PhD programs will require an interview. Most master's programs do not. It's a really good time to start contacting faculty you're interested in working with and contacting current students to ask about their experience. And then of course, you lastly commit to a program. So that kind of wraps it up for a super quick intro of grad school in general. If you have any more questions, we have great resources on our website. You can also meet with myself or other great colleagues at the Career Center one-on-one to talk about any questions that you have. You can make these appointments via Handshake. And then we have 2 really great events that are coming up next Tuesday and the Tuesday after that, where we've gotten admissions committee members from various graduate programs around UCSD and SDSU to come talk about what they're looking for in applicants. So make sure to register for those and don't miss out. And with that, I want to fly straight into introducing our panelists, the real reason we're here today. So we have 2 really great speakers. We have Dr. Eldridge Alcantara, who's an electronics engineer at the Naval Information Warfare Center. And then we have Dr. Mark Perelis, who did his postdoc here at UCSD and then went on to a position as a senior scientist at Ionis Pharmaceuticals. So welcome, Eldridge and Mark. I'm going to start off by having you guys just tell us really briefly about yourselves and your educational career and journey. Eldridge, if you'd like to start.
Okay, so I'm born and raised in San Diego, California, and I graduated from, I actually attended UC San Diego, so I'm an alumni. I did my bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering. And then I decided to go into the workforce, so working for the Navy. And then an opportunity came up to go back to graduate school. So I applied for a PhD program and got accepted to the University of Washington in Seattle, also doing electrical engineering. And I just finished at the end of 2020. And so now I'm back at the Navy again and just continuing on my journey there.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Mark?
Sure. My name is Mark Perelis. I'm originally from the Boston area in Massachusetts, and I went to undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania. I double majored in biology and economics, but I spent a lot of time as an undergrad doing research in molecular genetics of behavior. And I was not quite ready to be done with research, so I decided to go do a PhD at a place that had a strong program and track record in circadian rhythm biology, which was Northwestern University in Chicago. There I worked on how circadian clocks in our bodies regulate metabolism. And then I came to San Diego after my PhD and did a postdoc fellowship. And after about 4 years, I finally entered the actual workforce in the biopharmaceutical industry, working in early drug discovery for liver disease at Ionis.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. So with that, if you could go a little bit further and tell us now about your kind of a day in the life in your current position, maybe talk about what your work-life balance is like or some expectations and perks, a little more detail about what your current position is like.
Yeah, so for the Navy, I support Navy projects. So currently I support 2 projects. One is in underwater signal processing for glider systems. So these gliders collect data and we extract information, and then I run it through some software tools to extract the information that they want, the project managers want, and then report it out. And then I also develop software for an underwater communication system. So basically supporting 2 different projects, and they vary from year to year. Sometimes I'll support just 1 project or 2 or 3, it really depends. So, and in terms of work-life balance, so what's great about the Navy is we get every other Friday off. So that's really great. And the schedule, as with most works right now, it's very flexible. So it allows me to do other things outside of work. So one thing I do is I also like teaching. So I try to teach. I've taught a few classes at UCSD in the summers the last few years. And then I also teach a fitness class for UCSD Rec. So I teach a cardio kickboxing class once a week. So that allows me to do some things outside of engineering.
Awesome.
So for my day-to-day work, I spend about a quarter to a third of my time physically in the research lab, running experiments. We have cellular and animal models of liver disease, and we test drugs to look for, drugs that can improve outcome in diseases. I picked up some bioinformatics skills, so analyzing like whole genome scale data sets. I also spend a lot of my time reading and learning new methods. I don't know, it's my job is not that different from what it was like in grad school and then in my fellowship. There's a lot more meetings, I suppose. I have to keep track of timelines and projects and provide lots of updates, and also do some business development work. So I have to figure out how the things that we're doing research on, how we're going to be able to sell them. And yeah, so my day-to-day is essentially being a discovery scientist with a few additional responsibilities. I have also an employee. I have a senior research associate who works for me, and as much as I train him to learn how to do the work that we do, he brought in a lot of his own skills. So I kind of coordinate him teaching the rest of our group things that he knows about. And work-life balance is good. Compared to being in working or studying in a university, vacation time and weekends are a lot more rigid. So one thing that has been nice is my whole family's out on the East Coast, and it's a lot easier to know that I can leave and not think about work for a while when I go out and visit them. And then on weekends, it's nice to have time. I like to go paddleboarding. I like to take ski trips whenever I can on weekends. So yeah, I have no complaints about my work-life balance.
Awesome. Thanks for those descriptions. So could you tell the group a little bit about what motivated you to go to graduate school? How did you decide to go? We'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, for me, for my master's program, what motivated me was the EC department here at UCSD offered a joint bachelor's master's program. So that was an opportunity to kind of spend another year or two in school to get a master's degree. So that motivated me, and I didn't have to take the GREs, which was a good plus there. As for my PhD, that decision really came I was working full-time about 2-3 years in, and I just decided that I was kind of in a bad place in terms of my work projects, not really enjoying them at the time. And I just decided that I think I'm ready to go back to school. I always had it on the back of my mind to get a PhD. Yeah, after 2 or 3 years, I decided, I think I'm just ready to take a break and go back to school. And then my work also offered a scholarship, so a Navy scholarship, a DoD scholarship to go back, so fully funded. The only part of that is you would agree to come back to work for a few years. So I thought that was a really good deal. I always loved San Diego, so I had no intention to really live anywhere else. And for my PhD, what I was really looking forward to was getting more research skills, which would be applicable to my work. And then I was also looking forward to going back to teach again, and because I really saw that as my kind of career endpoint, either continue to work for the Navy or pursue a more full-time teaching position. So I thought having a PhD would be good for that.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, as I think I alluded to earlier, my decision to get a PhD was sort of very specific. I had been working as an undergrad. So as an undergrad, I was really interested in behavioral genetics and understanding how complex behaviors can be inherited. And I had been working in a lab studying circadian rhythms, so 24-hour day-night rhythms in behavior in using fruit flies as a model system. And I wasn't ready to let research go, and I wanted to learn how to apply that kind of work to questions that would be important in human physiology and human disease. And I went to Northwestern. I actually didn't apply to too many places because Northwestern was the place where they had found the first of these clock genes in mammals, in mice. And they had early work suggesting that if you change the function of these genes, you can cause diabetes and other metabolic diseases in animals. And I really wanted to work on that. So I had a specific sort of area that I was interested in, and I identified a place where I could do exciting biology.
Awesome. That's great. So the next question is, do you need previous work experience to that's related to your field to get into your grad program? Is taking a gap year/years off appropriate to build your resume?
So for me, it's not a requirement. I'm speaking more for my PhD program. So there wasn't a requirement at the University of Washington to have previous work experience, but I felt like it helped. So I had about a 5-year gap between my master's and a PhD, and I felt like that, when I look back on it now, it really helped because it helped me define what I wanted to do research in. So if I had applied for my PhD right after my master's, I probably would have no idea what I wanted to work on. I didn't work in a research lab during my undergraduate or master's program, so I didn't have any research skills at the time. So, but by being at work, I came to discover I really liked, I worked on signal processing projects, and I came to decide, yeah, I really like that. And so I sort of pursued that sort of work when I was applying for my program. And then also having that 5-year experience allowed me to put that into my personal statement. You know, this is what I've worked on, and this is why I'm interested in this area to pursue for my PhD. So that's why, for me, it helped.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, I would totally agree with Eldridge. I think it's definitely not required, but I think what is required is you have to have some idea of what you want to do in grad school and what you want to get out of it. And sometimes you know that when you're straight out of undergrad, and it makes sense to go do a PhD. But I do know, though, that most of my colleagues did take some time between undergrad and grad school, and they probably had faster and more productive PhDs than I did because they had a bit more experience of doing research, not just as an undergrad who came in for a couple hours every day. So I think there can be benefits, but it's not required.
Awesome. Thanks for that input. So the last question that I have myself is, how did you benefit from going through your graduate program or programs? What kind of skills did you gain that you use now?
So for me, I think I talked about it earlier. I didn't come in with research skills going to my PhD program. So I came out with, obviously stronger research skills like learning how to read papers and learning how to write. And so I actually used those skills a lot at work, where my project manager will say, oh, we have a problem with the system. Let's come up with a solution. So I now sort of have this procedure that I can go through similar as a graduate student, like do a literature review first. I'm comfortable doing that and identifying some different solutions and then applying them. And then also from graduate school, I also came to really like writing. So writing reports and that comes pretty natural for me. So and all that as a result of grad school. So and then also just knowledge of different awareness of the area, or at least the research topic I was working on, and learning how to handle difficult problems on my own. So those are all very beneficial for me in the work environment.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I guess I would start saying that more than the specific technical skills, I think that when you do a PhD, you quickly get put in a situation where you know more about your project than your mentor does. And then, you know, other experts, even though they might know more about biology or whatever field you're in generally, having kind of building that confidence where you can be an expert, and then learning how to be resourceful, and learning how to network with people to, you know, achieve your goals. Those would be, I would say, the most important things that I got out of grad school. Also, you know, getting a mentor, you know, people that will be part of your network who, if you stay in whatever field you got your PhD in, you can always call upon them for help or guidance, or maybe you can help them. And then I'd say the last thing is, for me, that some of the technical skills were useful, but that's, I think, lower on the list.
Okay, that's great insight. Thank you so much. So that's kind of the end of my questions. We've gotten quite a few questions in the chat as well, but I did want to open up the floor to anyone who wanted to unmute themselves and ask a question directly. Feel free to do so now, or you can keep posting them in the chat and we'll get to them in order. But I did want to give the floor to anybody who's in attendance who'd like to ask a question.
Hi, this can be for you or the two panelists, but I was kind of wondering, so every time that I've heard about people talk about grad school, I feel like the master's and PhD programs are always kind of lumped together, or like the way they talk about it, like I don't know what the distinctions actually are. And like you were saying, for example, for PhD programs, like knowing who the faculty are is important because like they would work with the faculty. Is it the same for masters, or like how would a master's program work compared to a PhD program is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that, but I think Eldridge would be a great person to answer since he did his master's and PhD separately. So what do you?
Yeah, my master's program was, so the distinction between them was a research. So the master's was really no emphasis on research. At least when I was doing my master's at UCSD, it was literally like all coursework. And so I took that because I wanted to learn more about the area before I went into the workforce. And then the PhD is a research project with the faculty. So those are, at least for me, the two distinctions. I know at the University of Washington, the master's degree, there is an option for a master's student to do a research project at the end, but that is totally optional. So that's really up to you if you want to do it. I've heard of some of my cohorts who are master's students. They came in with the intention of doing a thesis project, but I think they got a job offer their second year, and then they were just like, oh, I don't need it. So they just kind of did away with it, and they still got their master's. So it was totally fine.
Mark, did you want to add in anything?
I didn't get a master's degree, but I am under the impression that it's very different. So you would just want to think very carefully about whether or not you want to do a PhD or not.
Yeah, I think to echo that, I'd say two of the biggest differences that point out right away is length of time. So for a master's degree, you're looking at 1, 2, maybe 3 years if you're extending that, but usually about 2 years is a good guess. PhDs tend to vary more widely, but you're looking typically around 5, 6-ish years, sometimes 7. Sometimes there are PhDs that can be done in shorter times, as short as 4 years, but I'd say 5 to 6 is probably a good average. So the time that you're doing them is definitely a big distinction. Another distinction is the cost, the financial aid. Most master's programs are out of pocket to you. Now, there's always some financial aid options, and there are some opportunities where companies will help you get your master's degree, of course, but those are pretty far and few between. Whereas a lot of PhD programs are funded in some way or the other, whether that's through a student doing research in a lab and getting funding that way, whether it's through an employer paying for it, like in Eldridge's case, the Navy paying for it, through fellowships, through teaching assistantship. So whatever it is, PhD students, from what I know, do not pay out of pocket for their degree. So I think those are kind of the two, I guess, biggest things, but ultimately the decision between a master's and a PhD is really going to come from, do you need a PhD to do what you want to do, or do you need a master's to do what you want to do, right? Because you don't want to be spending 7 years doing something if you just really don't need that degree, right? So I think those are kind of the biggest considerations I would take into account. Okay, is there anybody else who would like to speak up for a question?
Hi, I also have a question. So for when you apply PhD, did you contact any faculties before you apply? And do you, like, I've heard people do that, but do you think that's effective, like regarding like how the chance of getting to PhDs? And then because when you contact professors, you kind of like, okay, I like your research and like I would like to be in your lab and blah blah, but like, do you actually, like, how sure are you about the research topic that you want to do in your PhD before you apply or while you're applying?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine, for your question. Eldridge, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So for me, I did not contact the professors before I applied. If I could go back, I wish I had, just so I can have more of a conversation with them. I did do research about the professors before I applied, so just to make sure I name dropped them in my personal statement saying, you know, oh, I want to work in this area. I feel like I'll be a good fit for this professor's lab. So that I made sure I did. But I did eventually, once I applied, I did have conversations with faculty members who did call me during sort of the decision-making process. And then the two schools I did get accepted to, they did fly us out on campus. So we were able to meet the faculty then as well before we had to make our final decision. So to answer, I would recommend contacting the faculty. I think that would be great. Just again, you can have hopefully have a conversation with them beforehand just to see if it's a good fit. Because not only should you look at a fit for your research, but also a personality fit as well. So during my program, I did switch advisors because in the end, it wasn't a good, I think, not a very good working relationship. So I felt like it was time to move on. So, and I wish, looking back, I could have had a meeting with him earlier. That would have been better.
Awesome, thank you. Mark, did you want to share?
Yeah, I also didn't reach out when I applied to grad school. I looked up faculty, but the only thing I would add, all of Eldridge's points I totally agree with, is that, well, in biological science, it's very common to get invited out for an interview and they fly you out. Usually that means you're going to be accepted. And that's a chance to actually speak to faculty. But if you are debating whether or not you should even fly out to an interview because you're not sure about a school, regardless, the one thing you should send an email to ask if there's somebody you really want to work with is ask them if they can take students, right? Because it might be that you found someone that you really would love to work for, but there's no one else at that university that you'd want to work with. So there's certain pieces of information like that are like need to know, and you should I would recommend getting that information.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I would echo all of that advice as a PhD candidate myself. I think that was really great advice. So I'm gonna take one question that came from the chat, and then I can go back and get more questions from the audience. So somebody asked, what kind of things should students who have already graduated do in order to be competitive in the grad school application process? I can jump in first, and then maybe if you guys have something to add. I think so. As was already mentioned, a lot of people take some time in between their undergraduate and their grad school, whether that be a master's or a PhD. The best thing that you can do is be getting experience that's going to be useful to you in your graduate program. It's going to help you be a successful applicant because you'll be able to speak about prior experiences that motivated you to get this graduate degree. And then, like Eldridge mentioned, if you have some more experience, it might help you also, in your graduate degree as a graduate student. So I think the best thing that you can do is find ways to get experience in that. And that doesn't necessarily mean jumping straight into a job, because sometimes that transition isn't possible, right? If you want to go to graduate school for something that's pretty removed from what you went to undergrad from, it might be a little not a direct link. But getting volunteering in certain places is probably a really good way to start getting your feet wet. Even doing informational interviews, as I mentioned earlier, start talking to people and building a network in that field to give you a better idea of what does it take to get into these grad programs. I think those would all be useful things. I don't know if Eldridge or Mark, you guys want to add something to that.
Yeah, sorry. One thing I would add is that aside from just the experience that you might need to be able to do the research or whatever the task is in grad school, whatever you have to do to come up with the question that you want to work on, that's equally important, because even your your grad school application, some of it is listing all your credentials and all the things that you've done, but there's a piece of it, like your personal statement, it has to tell a story that has to kind of lead to you asking some question that, at least for a PhD, right, that warrants spending a bunch of time and somebody else's money to work on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. So looking at things that can add to your application, so things that you could gain experiences either through a job or volunteering, as Alicia mentioned, that you can put in your personal statement and resume. And what else was I thinking about? Other skills, I would think even getting teaching experience, tutoring or something like that could help, because often, at least for even actually a master's or PhD, you can work as a TA, which will help pay for school. So having some teaching experience will help with that as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll switch back to questions from the audience if anyone wants to unmute and go ahead and ask.
What type of extracurriculars do you guys say matter most?
I'll jump in really quick. I think that's going to be highly specific to the program that you're applying to. But I think as far as extracurriculars go, if I'm and correct me if I'm not understanding your question right, but I think something that programs are starting to look for a lot more that I've noticed is leadership. And I think people used to think that was more for programs that maybe typically required a lot of leadership, but I'm seeing it in STEM PhD program applications, or in really across the board evidence of leadership. So, and leadership, and I think initiative and problem solving. I think those are the things that really come up regardless of program. If you have any kind of evidence of that through your extracurriculars, that's really helpful. So I know I didn't give you an answer of a specific extracurricular, but something where you have the opportunity to take initiative, have a leadership position, or solve certain problems, fill a need for something, are going to be some really good things to talk about in that application. Eldridge, did you have anything?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I was going to add that in that last question about things a candidate could do to be more competitive. I would have recommended joining these professional societies as well, and seeing if you can get involved in committees or working on other projects as a volunteer. So yeah, as Alicia said, anything extracurricular that shows that you have leadership, you can work on teams, that you've done projects outside of the classroom, all of that is just very, very helpful for an application.
Mark, I don't know if you heard the question, but
No, I totally
did.
heard. Sorry, I
Okay.
had somebody bother me at my door for a second, but yeah, I would echo all of those comments. I think it will vary a lot depending on the kind of grad school, but things that, yeah, activities that demonstrate leadership that aren't directly related to what you are going to go to grad school for absolutely help and show what kind of person you are.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
When you say join committees, what do you mean by that?
So some like professional societies, at least in my field, there's something called IEEE, and then there are committees there to get involved in like planning for conferences, and yeah, just one thing that comes to mind, but or reading papers, so being on a reading committee for future conferences. Those are opportunities actually available for students as well. I did one as a grad student reading for, I joined a engineering education society under IEEE, and yeah, they were looking for student readers to read paper submissions and provide comments on them. I don't know if that answers, hopefully that answers your question.
And you can join them if you are a student or if you just graduated.
Yep, they have student. They have student options, at least in my field and the societies I was interested in joining. There were student memberships. Some of them are like very low cost. I think for students in at least one of the societies was like $5 a year. So very beneficial. So.
And what about for already graduated students, in my case, for example? Do they have them?
Yeah, they have these societies. You can join them a lot higher cost, but there's opportunities there to join as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm going to skip to a question that we got in the chat that was actually boosted a couple times. So it looks like a few students are interested. They're interested in getting advice about getting letters of recommendations from professors after it's been a few years since you've been out of school, or recommendations for staying in contact with faculty during those intervening years between your undergrad and your graduate school. Do you guys have any advice on that?
I was just quiet for a little bit, so I'll chime in. Even though I probably don't have the best answer, because I applied to my PhD when I was a senior in college. So I guess just setting aside the how do you keep in touch after many years, I found throughout, even after grad school and during grad school, people are much more willing to want to talk to you and help you, in the academic world than you would think. My approach was I did research. So people that I worked with, I happened to have 2 faculty that I did research with. And then I chose, what was my favorite class that I took that I felt really proud of how I did. And that was my 3rd recommendation. Having said that, a teacher who taught you or a professor who taught you, lectured you in a class, right? After 5 years, even if you were a star student, they might not remember you. On the other hand, again, this is people that I was close with in grad school, because it's now been quite a long time since I was in grad school, but I take every opportunity I can to keep in touch. If I read something interesting that relates specifically to work that I know that they do, or an interest I know they have, I just send an email. I probably, do this once a month or once every 2 months to old colleagues from Northwestern mostly. And yeah, I guess I can't speak to the many years gap, but I think that trying to maintain a relationship would be easier than you might think.
Thanks so much, Mark. Eldridge, did you have any advice?
Yeah, so for me, yeah, so I again applied for go back to school after 5 years. So yeah, I had to go back and hunt for those 3 letters. So for me, what helped was that I had TA'd pretty much all my years at UCSD. So I basically contacted the professors I had worked for. So that was helpful. But I can also tell you another point of view. So I've told you like I've taught classes before. So I hear from students all the time asking for letters. And yeah, sometimes it's been years. So like Mark said, sometimes I don't remember them, but I was very willing to help them. So I just said, just give me your academic record and your personal statement, and I'll do the best I can with that letter, with what I know about what you've given me. So so yeah, so those students just having the bravery to contact me and see what was up, see if I was willing to help, that's really the best thing you can do. So fingers crossed that one of those professors will email you back.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll add just a little bit into that. I think that was really good. That was really good insight, especially about just having the bravery to reach out and ask, and maybe a little bit of perseverance if it doesn't work out with your first professor, to keep trying. But as far as maybe addressing the how do you keep in touch if you already know that it's gonna, you're gonna take a few years. I think what is a pretty good idea is to send an email. And I tell students once every 6 months, right? But this is a very not hard and fast rule. Once a year is probably fine as well, unless it's kind of up to you. But to just shoot a quick email saying, this is what I've been up to. This is what I've been doing. These are the projects I'm working on. My goal is still to apply in this fall, things like that. You can also always throw in a question. They may not answer, but you can throw in a question saying, do you have any advice as I start to look for programs? Any things like that. Ask them a question that would, kind of engage them in your email. And I think doing that as from the time you graduate on keeps them in the back of their mind, even if they're not responding to your emails, right? So I think that can be something that's really easy that you can do to make sure that it doesn't, 5 years don't go by and you go back. But that being said, even if 5 years go by and you didn't keep in touch, chances are they're still going to be willing to help you and do their best.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, I got those kinds of emails from my former students that I had taught in the summers. So yeah, like, oh, this is what I'm up to right now. And they asked, like you said, Alicia, yeah, they probably just followed you probably were talking to them. So they were like, oh, hey, this is what I'm up to. Do you have any advice about searching for grad schools? So, and then eventually a question came up about writing a letter, and there you go.
Awesome.
I would also add that even people who it hasn't been that many years, they will probably also ask you for a personal statement and a resume and whatever, so that they can write your letter. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think honestly, even people that you think do know you fairly well, it's never a bad idea to provide that, because from admissions committee point of view, what we're really looking for in the letters is to have supporting statements of what you say in your personal statement. So the closer those can be linked together, the stronger your application is going to be. And so if your letter writers have an idea of what you're talking about in your personal statement, that makes that connection much easier. So with that, are there any other questions from the audience that you guys would like to ask?
Hi, may I have or ask a question regarding this previous question we've discussed?
Sure.
So I've heard that some, or your contact or professor, they're sometimes too occupied, to write the letter of recommendation themselves. So they basically told the student, hey, can you just give me a draft and I'll do edits and I'll return it back to you with my signature or stamp. So is there like a preference as to if the professor gives you that option to take it, or just kind of find someone else that will take the time to do it themselves?
I'll let one of the panelists take a crack at that
I
first.
would say, I think it would be pretty unusual for somebody writing you a letter for grad school to ask you to write it. that might be a case where you might want to find someone else to write it. I mean, unless they're so famous that having a letter from this person you think is going to impact your application. That would be my kind of gut reaction.
Yeah, I would recommend that too. But yeah, it's actually happened to, it wasn't for a grad school application, it was for another application. I had to get a letter from a professor, and the professor did ask, could you just write it and then I'll edit it and sign the signature. And I kind of just had to say, okay, because I had to get a letter from the department chair. So there really was no choice. And that's what he requested. So I just went with it. So it's hard to get 3 letters. So, you know, eventually you just might get to a point where this is kind of the option. And so whatever you need to get those 3 letters. So.
Yeah, I would say that after admissions, like once you're done applying for schools, this sort of thing happens a lot. Like if you apply for a grant and you need a letter of recommendation from your boss, he might ask you to write it, or references for like a job or promotion. But for grad school, I think it should come from somebody who cares a little bit, at least a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
So we have time for one more question, and I'll open it up to the audience if you'd like, or I can pull one from the chat, but I'll give an opportunity to one last person would like to speak.
I can ask a question.
Sure.
So I'm actually in the computer engineering major, and I'm also interested in electrical engineering. And like most times people feel like computer stuff is very good for just go to work after you graduate from college. And yeah, so I'm constantly having this struggle of whether to lean more on the career side or on the more graduate side, because I'm also a little bit interested in circuits. So like since Eldridge is also is in the area of electrical engineering, I want to ask if you have ever had this kind of struggle, and if so, how you think of it. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I did have the struggle after my batch, when I was deciding whether to pursue my master's degree. Yeah, I did have to think about whether it would just be better to get a job or stay in school. And I guess so I did struggle with that. I mean, how I came to my decision was really, I did get I remember I got some advice from a professor that did say that, coming out with a master's degree, you would get a higher salary at a job. So, eventually the job was my endpoint, but it was a decision whether I wanted to do it after my master's or after my bachelor's degree. So it was a struggle. And also for me, I wasn't ready to leave school yet. I kind of wanted to stay and learn more. My area of emphasis was digital communications, and I kind of only had touched the surface in my undergraduate program. So kind of wanted to learn a little bit more before I went out to work. And hopefully that answers your question.
Awesome. Well, we're just getting to the end of our event. So thank you everyone for attending. I just want to direct you to the chat. If you have, there are so many questions we didn't get to. If you are one of those people who we didn't get to your question, please come see us at the Career Center. We can speak to every single one of those questions one-on-one, and have a really in-depth conversation about what you're thinking about, and you can make an appointment with a pre-grad advisor through Handshake. We also have 2 events that would cover a lot of the questions that you guys asked today, in terms of, how to make yourself a competitive applicant, how to get good letters, what to do during your gap years, and the demystifying graduate admissions events that are coming up in the next 2 weeks. So don't forget to register for those. And with that, I want to thank our panelists, Eldridge and Mark. Thank you so much for joining us. And lastly, we're just displaying some of our future upcoming events from an Alumni 101. We have lots of events that might interest you guys, so definitely go ahead and check those out. All right. Thank you all for joining us tonight.